Thank you for joining us. I'm Aaron Carter from Stanley Gibbons Baldwin's. I'm here joined by Dean Shepherd
Yep, Dean Shepherd, editor of Gibbons Stamp Monthly magazine.
and Jan Hofmeyr, multi-award winning philatelist, including winner of the Bernard Henning Grand Award and Large Gold at Chicago PEX 2024. Jan's published several books, including Philatelic Invention to Prevent Stamp Reuse in the United States, 1861 to 1881, released last year, and the highlights of which are featuring in GSM in the first half of this year. In order to bring some of these fascinating topics to life, we've invited Jan to share a little about the journey he's taken through philately, as well as highlights from his latest publication with the GSM audience. So, Jan, first and foremost, how did you get started in the hobby?
Oh, very normally I was a kid and I collected. But then family came along and I stopped. And so I started again when the family left home, and you have more free time. And I thought it's a really easy thing to do. My wife is happy with it because it keeps me out of trouble. And I think you can carry on doing it even when you're going senile. So it's it's a hobby for all the ages, if you like. But I love collecting. And stamps are one of the things I love collecting.
We did some research recently, and we found that around 50% of, in fact, more than 50% of philatelists got into the hobby before the age of 12. And of those, the majority, it was the sins of the father, so to speak, who kind of got them involved. Would that be the same for you?
Yeah. Yeah, you're playing rugby and stuff like that. I mean, I was born in South Africa. And then your parents say, why don't you collect stamps? And you say, well, fine.
And was it always US philately you were interested in, or did it start elsewhere?
No, it was Red Gibbons. South Africa. I mean, we were a republic by then, but no, Red Gibbons was it. That was what consumed the young schoolboy's mind.
And how did you get into US philately then? What was the attraction there?
Yeah, I when I started again, I wanted to collect classics. I mean, as a kid, you drool over the classics in the catalogs, and I wanted to collect classics. And then it was a matter of looking around, and I really fell in love with the 1861 engraved series from the United States. Quality of the printing's incredibly high. I mean, the perfs are all over the place because once they're printed, they don't care. They just want to get them off the shop floor. But also, it's one of the world's biggest collecting markets, and so it's really interesting. And then it's also interesting historically. An amazing amount of archival material seems to have leaked out of the banknote companies onto the market at a very early stage. So it's a very interesting area to collect.
So the material is out there. Some of it must be extremely rare, some of the things you've got in your collection and was mentioned in your book. What's the most memorable find that you've come across so far?
So I didn't really, I haven't really, I would say, find anything. I mean, but there was stuff that I wanted to get into my collection. And the most important, by a long way, is the Grill essay that's signed by Charles Steele, who invented the Grill. And it's an essay in which he claims ownership. So he signs it as the inventor of the Grill. And then it's co-signed by senior officials from the National Banknote Company to recognize that he was the inventor. And one of the reasons it's so important is because they tried for nearly 2 years. They tried to ignore it and just sideline it. So it's a big political battle as well. So that to me is the most important. In terms of discoveries, my fondest discovery is the McDonough ink, horrible looking stamps, because it was an ink that was made out of sugar, really. And that the concept was highly fugitive, but it was so difficult to print with that they would print it, and then being glycerine, it would run all over the place. So it created these crazy stamps.
Must have been quite dangerous to transport and work with if it's glittering based.
That is exactly why the Post Office Department turned it down. And MacDonald was in a very powerful position because he was secretary of the National Banknote Company. So he was promoting it heavily. And Zeverly from the post office sent it to the Department of Agriculture for testing. And they wrote a note back saying, this is highly fugitive. In fact, it's too fugitive. It disappears when it rains.
What is it that attracted you to competition and to compete and to show your exhibition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was one of those people who was just buying stuff and just sticking it into a stock book because I love the material. And I bought mostly from Siegel auctions in the United States and one or two key dealers. I happened to be in New York, so I thought I'd visit on an auction day. So I thought I'd just go there and experience the thing live. And Scott Treppel, who's kind of the CEO of Siegel, knew by then what I had. And he said, you should really exhibit. I hadn't thought about it before. And that was what got me started. So I rejoined the Royal Philatelic Society of Cape Town. I started exhibiting. But that's your answer.
Excellent. And you've also written a couple of books and, exhibited worldwide. How important do you think it is for philatelists to share their knowledge with other people?
I think it's incredibly important because, especially with philately becoming a less popular hobby, with stamps kind of disappearing off envelopes, it's not a lateral collectible anymore. And so I think it's incredibly important to create a documentary record.
And the articles in GSM taken from your book, they seem to be the ways to prevent reuse is to, it seems unique to the US. I assume they were conscious of what was going on elsewhere. So what do you think drove them to come up with these new innovative ways to cancel stamps?
I think the thing that really interests me about what happened in the United States, you're absolutely right, that a lot of the so-called US inventions were actually discoveries that had been made elsewhere. And some of them, like double printing or, printing a sort of a network over or under the main image of the stamp, were in widespread use in Europe already in the 1850s. The decal, which was very seriously investigated by this Treasury and the Post Office Department, was invented by a Frenchman before in 1790 or something like that. So, but in the United States, they really encouraged people to file patents for ideas, much more so than in Europe. And they were fairly easygoing with what they would accept as a patent. And there were no transnational protection of intellectual property rights. And I think a lot of the European inventors didn't even think of patenting stuff because the mindset was just different. Or they worked for companies and the companies claimed the property, the intellectual property. And I think that happened with De La Rue, for instance. But in the States, in the 1860s, when the Post Office Department decided they needed to create a self-destructing stamp, people saw this as an opportunity to make money. And so these patents just started flowing out, from some that were really sensible to some that were really quite entertaining. Many of them were not new discoveries, but they were new in the United States.
So which of the methods that didn't quite make the cut is the favorite?
Oh, look, the glamour one is the exploding stamp. So, the guy who put a little cap of, I think it's mercury fulminate. It's the cap that guns use to ignite gunpowder. And put one of those into stamps. It was we still don't know who the inventor was, but the stamps were around in 1864 and they continued to experiment with them all the way through into the 1870s. And you would cancel them by banging them with a hammer and they'd explode.
It seems to be a common thread with the glycerin printings.
Yeah. The most beautiful, I think, are the 25-cent insurance tax stamps printed by Butler and Carpenter based on Henry Lowenberg's decal patent. So the basic idea was you print the stamp on transparent paper, and it's like a decal. And if you try to lift the stamp off the paper, the transparent paper comes away, but the design stays on the envelope. And the stamps that resulted, that Butler and Carpenter produced, are absolutely gorgeous. They're incredibly fragile. They shine because they're printed on. You see the gum, basically. You see the gum from both sides, and they glisten. They're really gorgeous stamps. I think those would be my favorites, and there are very few of them. There's only like 15 or 20 of them around.
And you've obviously done a lot of research for your displays and your books.
Yeah.
What do you find most enjoyable? Is it the hunting down the stamps and the new edition for your collection, or is it the intellectual pursuit of finding out
I
the
love
story behind the machine?
yeah, that's a great question. I love the research, actually. And right from the start, when I first exhibited in New York, my first international exhibition was the World Stamp Show in 2016. And I got a prize for original research. And it's kind of been my signature ever since. I just know I'm going to do well because I know I'll do better than most other people at the research part of it. I love the stamps too, but I really enjoy it. And I'm amazed that there's still so much you can discover that people just didn't know or overlooked.
So you mentioned a little earlier about the reduction in physical interaction with postage stamps, and it's important to continue communicating philately. Do you think that reduction in physical interaction means, and the daily usage means, that perhaps those that want to see philately go from strength to strength need to lean into the culture, the art, and the history? Is it finding a way to communicate what you've just mentioned about unleashing someone's passion for the research side? How do you see it moving forwards?
That is such an interesting question. I think stamps have become a normal collectible. I think when we were kids, they were a natural collectible because they turned up in your post box.
Yeah.
And then the post offices got really good at creating subscriber bases for new issues, and first day covers became, it was a marketing thing. And so I'd say 1970s were kind of the heyday of that phase of stamp collecting. But human beings just have a natural propensity to collect. There's somewhere between 2 or 5% of people just like stuff. And I think stamps now fall into that category of natural collectible. And that actually, in a way, frees it up, because you go all the way from really tatty but incredibly important documents that were floating around in the 1850s and 1860s and 1840s, and the original design elements, the archival material, through to the more modern issues, which some of them are made purely to appeal to a collecting instinct, not to go onto an envelope. The stamps that the Chinese produce that you scratch, that have a little perfume that comes out when you scratch them, that sort of thing. Or the 3D stamps, those sorts of things. So I think they become a natural collectible, and the word you use, lean in, is really important. Where the hobby is struggling a little bit is to create meeting places or ways of meeting for enthusiasts to get together that are not kind of bound by the old ways that we used to meet in stuffy rooms with a jacket and tie. And most of us were over 60 and we were mostly men, so.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think is storytelling. I mean, I think thematic collecting is, to the extent that it's a collectible. One of a really important part of the future, if you look at most people, when they ask themselves the question, what would I like to collect? It's things they like elephants or butterflies or airplanes or motor cars or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think thematic collecting is also very much a part of the future. And then that naturally opens up storytelling if you're going to exhibit, putting these things together in a way that is attractive and interesting to other people because they're telling a story as well. It's certainly not going to die. Human beings can't help themselves.
Absolutely, everything that we see, we obviously speak to many collectors across different categories, and
Yeah.
the same sentiments are there, and the story
Yeah.
is hugely important.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how we can quite, capture what the comic collectors do, because they can rock up in Spider-Man suits and things like that, and that's what
We
they
could
do.
do that too.
So our fun meetings will tend to be a bit more sedate, but
And if you could give some advice to a fledgling philatelist who's just
yeah,
starting to find their feet, they've maybe got the bug, whether it's a gift, whether it's a family member, and they're just kind of starting out, what would your first couple of pieces of advice be
that's
for
a
them?
really good question. This is a great time to start collecting because there are a huge number of collections in attics that people put together 30 or 40 or 60 years ago, and nobody knows what to do with them. And so they are coming onto the market. And so you can begin to, if you have an instinct, if it's something that you might want to do, you can start putting, you can start collecting stamps with a very small budget, and put together a really beautiful collection. So that would be one thing. But the second thing would be to just find like-minded people and get together in front of a box full of stamps. I mean, that's how our club happens to be really good at getting kids involved, and that's how we're doing it. We just have these stamp shows. We don't have club
Yeah.
meetings. We just have stamp shows. We advertise them on the radio and in the newspaper. And we rock up with boxes and boxes and boxes and full of stamps. And the kids just pile in and they lie on the floor and they start putting the stuff together.
And what
Obviously,
sort
when
of
you become
questions do they
more...
ask?
Sorry?
Sorry, what sort of questions do they ask? So you have children on the floor, a box of stamps that they're rummaging through. Like, what springs to
They're
mind for
always
them?
looking for things that they like. That's why I say thematic collecting is
Yeah.
kind of where it's heading, or something that they might be learning about in school, something that's geographically important or scientifically important. For the older collector, I still think join a club.
Mhm.
You're going to find a lot of people who are really just very happy to see you. And they'll be very happy to share information. And then the third thing would be there's a huge amount you can do online. And a lot of clubs are migrating online as well. So sign up for the Royal of London seminars or the Collectors Club of New York seminars, There's a huge amount that you can do from the comfort of your home.
And do you see that you've mentioned kind of signing online or joining communities online? Do you see there being a need for advancement in the digital side of philately to support its growth?
Yeah, it's extremely important. I mean, I think various of the older clubs are exploring it. I think the American Philatelic Society is doing quite a good job of mixing digital with hard copy content, and also trying to create digital content that will be appealing. And one of the first things they did was employ a bunch of young people who weren't collectors, and then gave them the challenge: get your friends interested, and start to create content that would draw them to the hobby. So no, digital is absolutely part of the future. It's also an incredibly important way to meet, because people like to be able to meet. It's much easier to put together a circle of people who have common interests if they don't have to worry about where they live. So yeah, incredibly important.
And I guess the GSM audience is an example of that community, albeit in a slightly different format. What was it that drew you to provide or to deliver your highlights in these series of articles this year?
Yeah, it's a fantastic it's a fantastic way. Well, I think it's one of the two most important sort of mixture between serious and popular stamp magazines in the world. The other one I would put up there is the American Philatelist, because they both have an amazing distribution still. But what really appeals to me about the Gibbons Monthly is it has a bigger global footprint. Because it's still the empire, the foundation of the empire is still there. You can see where Red Gibbons, it goes where the Red Gibbons catalog goes. And so it has this fantastic distribution across the world. And so if you want people to become aware of something that you've done that you think might be interesting, then this is the best way to get to the widest global audience. For North America, or particularly for the United States, it has to be the American Philatelist. But those are the two.
And I guess final question from me: if you look at the items that you've amassed over the year, your collection, if you could only retain one, what item would that be?
I know which one is the most important, but I mean, it's extremely difficult to choose just one. It'd be much easier with 5. I think the one that would win out in the end is the Lowenberg 25-cent insurance essay that was created in about 1864, because it glows. It's an incredibly fragile, and the colors are just gorgeous, and it glistens in the light. It's just and they weren't trying to make it glisten. That's just the way it turned out. It's a beautiful stamp. The one that you featured on your front cover, that's one of my favorites, because anybody who's like an addicted collector loves stuff that's scruffy and historical. And this, is absolutely perfectly fits the bill. It's original, it's scruffy, it's historical, it's ugly, but it's extremely important. And then I guess not the one that I mentioned earlier, which is the signed essay that Charles Steele used to claim ownership of his invention. It would be what he called his first experiments, a very tatty piece of paper, which was the first piece of paper with the grill imprinted on, no stamps, just experimenting with the grill idea. And he signed that as well and called it First Experiments. Those would be my top 3, I think. I do like McDonough's. I do not like McDonough's stamps because they also glisten, because they're glycerine, but they are so messy. I mean, for an accomplished printer to have come up, it's just that with an idea like that, it's just so, ridiculous. So I like them too. More than one.
Well, Jan, thank you very much for your time. Really, really interesting. We're going to ask our audience whether they have any questions for you over the coming weeks, and we'll relay those. But for those of you that did join us, make sure you don't miss out on this fascinating mini series in Gibbons Stamp Monthly. By subscribing now for just over £30, you'll enjoy digital access to over 10 years of previous editions, as well as the latest issue every month. You can also reach out to the editor Dean via GSM at stanleygibbons.com. And most importantly, for those willing to delve or wishing to delve further into philatelic invention to prevent stamp reuse in the United States, 1861 to 1881, it can be purchased from Amazon in markets across the world. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.